and we missed the first little bit. There we go. I'll say welcome to Eddie again. Welcome. Why have we asked Eddie to join us? Quite apart from the fact that Eddie is a really nice guy. He's, in my opinion, an excellent communicator, and one of the best seminars I've ever been to on preaching was one that Eddie presented a long time ago in New Zealand, which I kept my notes from, and I think some of the ideas in that seminar are really quite worth sharing. So that's why I invited Eddie to join us. So Eddie is currently the president of the North New Zealand Conference, and at this very moment, Eddie's sitting at Tui Ridge Rotorua, because you've got your ministers' meetings on, Eddie, the pastors' wives and spouses' family meetings. So I appreciate you going out of your way to join us from Rotorua. Eddie, when I lived in New Zealand, if you wanted to make a phone call at Rotorua, you had to walk outside to the top of the hill and stand in funny angles, but obviously you've got internet at Rotorua now.
Hey, hi Brendan, and hi everybody. Great to see you guys. Yeah, we're right in the middle of our pastors and spouses meetings. We're actually not in Tui Ridge. We're actually in Rotorua proper. We're using one of the hotels there, and I'm in the motel that I'm staying in with my wife, and she's at the session right now, which is about how to spice up your marriage. So I hope she's taking plenty of notes.
Well, maybe down the track we can get Tessa Tupai to do a webinar on how to spice up marriage. But for today, we're going to be talking about preaching for life change. And as I say, Eddie's a communicator who I think does this particularly well. So a bit of background on this. When I was pastoring at Papatoe Church and the elders did their assessment of my gifts at that point and where I was up to, one of the areas I scored lowest on at that point was preaching. And so we went all out to try and get better equipped at that and to try and learn some of those skills. For me, it seems some people are just naturally gifted, really good presenters, and some people seem to have the content, they seem to have the ability, they seem to have all the gifts. Yet, let me find which one I need to mute there. Yet for other people, it seems more of a challenge. But for me, quite apart from the obvious one of being told to slow down all the time, there was some stuff that I learned from Eddie, which seemed to make a big difference. So Eddie, appreciate you joining us today. So first of all, the way we're going to work it is I'll ask Eddie some questions to get through some of the content that I think is valuable for all of us to hear. Then we'll open it up for questions. So Eddie, life-changing preaching. First of all, why do you have such an interest in preaching? I know it's something all of us do, but for you it's something you've made your craft. For you it's something that you read a lot about, you listen a lot about, you study a lot about. Why preaching?
Hey, thanks Brendan, and again, greetings to everybody today. Look, we're all preachers and we all want to communicate well, and so for me, it's always been a big deal to figure out how to communicate effectively, but more so to communicate in a way that will actually bring a person to a point where they apply what they hear and brings transformation to their lives. And yeah, that was a long time ago, Brendan, when we did that training down at Longburn College. And I have to say today that I've had to learn so much more as the listeners and the generations have changed. And I think it's as pastors, we all need to be, well, I find I just need to be at the game all the time.
So Eddie, you start off talking about that. Well, first of all, you talk about the purpose of preaching is for life change, but you start off talking about preparing yourself as a preacher. What does that look like for you? When you say prepare yourself as a preacher, what does that mean?
The sermon starts, the actual sermon and the preparation for that sermon starts, as you know, sometimes weeks and even months before the actual message. So having that time to plan out the menu of what's going to be preached that particular Sabbath takes place a long time earlier. Even now, in the last 2 years, I've gone back to pastoring a local church, And just being in a local church where we're having to preach much more regularly, and I can't preach the one sermon that I use right around the conference. But we're looking at series of sermons and what we believe needs to be the menu for the church. And so there's all that time of prayer together with the elders. There's the time of understanding where the church is at and what the church needs. So that's in the form of just the one-on-one discussions, the visitations, the surveys with the elders and with the church members. And then, of course, personally, I don't know what it's like for you. Sometimes for me, it comes early. Sometimes, like this Sabbath sermon only just came this morning. And I've just been praying for ages for this. And so that time to be able to be apart from yourself, by yourself, is so key. And I know we do that all in different ways. For me, the shower really works well. It's expensive on the water bill. But just thinking through sermons, reviewing sermons, practicing sermons, but then also just having things come. But essentially just getting that time by yourself, as well as getting time with your team to plan.
So I just want to pick up on a point there. So you, first of all, just to clarify, Eddie is the president of North New Zealand Conference, but has also chosen to pastor a local church for a whole bunch of reasons, but just to keep yourself remind you that you're a pastor, Eddie. So that's just to clarify where Eddie's up to. But when you talk about praying with your team, so with your elders team, you pray about what sermons are coming, you pray about what the church needs. How do you work out that preaching menu?
There are a list of sermons that we know we will definitely preach that year. We will preach on forgiveness. We will preach on relationships. So there's a list of about 9 topics that we will definitely preach on, but we will then just pray and share together as a part of our visiting and interaction with the members. What do we sense? Number one are the needs that are in our church, but then also secondly, our vision together with the church of where we're going forward so we can move the church forward. So that's the second key element that goes alongside what are the needs of the church, but then also what do we need to be preaching that will move the church forward according to the vision, mission, values, and philosophy that we have as a local church.
Now, another point that runs on from there, Eddie, you've talked about, thinking time in the shower. You talked about your praying time. I remember when you talked to me about preaching, you talked about more important than crafting the sermon, which is important. You talked about the preacher being the right kind of person. Yeah, at the time you had a quote that said, people listen to what you preach, they become who you are. If you can explore that one for a moment.
Yeah, the maxim that goes with that for me is the messenger is the message. The people have to trust you, they have to believe you. As soon as you stand up, who you are really counts. And so that time of visiting, that time of being with the people, and we know it all even more so today. People don't care that I'm president. They don't care that I've been to Avondale and I've got a couple of degrees. They don't care whether I wear a suit and a tie or not. They want a real person in front of them. And that whole vulnerability piece of, So I've been through a whole journey about how to present and how, whether you're with a lapel mic or whether you're standing at the pulpit, all of that is just secondary to you being that authentic self before the Lord.
Yep. And so messenger counts more than your message. But let's shift in now to, so you've got your topic. You talk lots about crafting, and Eddie's one of those guys who has acronyms for everything. And so crafting, but when you go about crafting your sermon, what's that actually look like? You've got your topic. What are you going to do with that? How do you then start shaping it?
So I've always used this acronym or acrostic CRAFT, C-R-A-F-T. And so C is collect and categorize. And so always start with the C, collecting and categorizing. And that's just collecting everything and anything. So I'm collecting illustrations, I'm collecting Bible texts, I'm collecting quotes, I'm collecting sermons that other people have preached on the same subject, books, magazine articles, a whole piece. So collecting, and then categorizing is just putting everything in order. So C is collecting and categorizing. R is for taking time to reflect on all of this material that you've gathered over many weeks and months. You're pulling it all out all now and then. You're doing it's researching and reflect. So R is for research and reflect. So going through all the material, doing all the reading, the study, and then taking time to reflect. And that's why it's really hard to just plan a sermon the week before, because you just need that rumination time, that time to stand in the shower and just run things over as you're driving or stuck in traffic or whatever it is, the time to reflect on it. So A is to apply, is to work at arranging and applying. So this is where putting everything, organizing your outline. So arranging your outline, putting it into a clear outline, and then looking at applications. What are the applications? And so the key piece is with the point that each point that you're making, if you're doing a classic 3-point sermon, that every single point with the approach I've taken and learned from others is that every single point has a verb in it, so that it's something that you do. So this point that you make, you put a verb into it so that it's something that we actually do. Not only that, it's centered around God. It's Christ-centered, and it's actionable. So CRA. F is fashion and flavor. So that's where you put in all your quotes, your illustrations, and all that needs to go with that. And then T is trim, tie, and title. So T is where you've got just too much material. We usually have just too much material, and you know what it's like. We preach too long, or we try to put in too much. And this is one of my big weaknesses, is I just cannot trim out that extra illustration or the extra text or whatever it is. So trim, tie is just to make sure that it all flows, it's all tied together. And then title that's when we finally put a title in for the message. So that's the approach, Brendan, that I use.
So that's your basic process. I'll just make one comment there. The point where you said apply every point in your sermon has a verb. That's the one thing. If there was one thing I picked up from Eddie when he did this preaching process, that's the one that probably made the biggest difference in how people engaged in the sermons I was presenting, when every point had an action step in it. So it wasn't just more knowledge or information, it actually came to the application. So that's one thing we're picking up on.
I'll just find the sermon I preached recently and just give you a really quick example of what I mean by putting the verbs in. This is, I think, a couple of weeks ago. We're preaching through the fruits of the Spirit. Always a good series to do. And I'll come back to that, Brendan. It's not coming up on my iPad.
That's anyway, okay.
That's the key point.
Yep. Now, once you've done that, so you've got that there, and I know this is different for everybody, but at that point, when you preach, do you then, how do you practice that sermon? How much practice do you need to give that? What's that look like between you crafting it and then getting it ready for delivery?
Right now, I've got it to the place where I get the whole sermon down onto one page, just one single page, because I'm trying to move to the place now where I've memorized the message before I preach. And so right up the top, I've got the main message summarized in one sentence. This is what I want people to walk away with that day. And then the 3 or 4 key application points. It's all out on one page, and then it's just a matter of going through it and literally practicing it, just going through it and getting the key triggers of those points in my head, so that I'm able to literally get up and preach without notes. So it's just getting it down to that one page.
Now, something that you used to do, I'm not sure if more recently, Eddie, but when I heard you preach, you always gave out a page to the congregation. What's that all about?
Still do that.
Why do you do that page, and how does that come about?
So I still do that. Used to be just a very basic page of fill in blanks and text. Now I try to make it look a bit more fancier with some of the templates that come with the word processing programs. But I have the basic one pager in front of me. So the handout is really key. The handout is for them to follow along as I'm moving through the message. Their chance to take notes, but it's a great resource, and I encourage them to use it for their small groups, for devotions, for witnessing. And as we move through the message, I'm praying that it is resourcing them to take the message beyond just the presentation, so that it lives that much longer than the normal 72 hours that people remember a sermon for. Yep.
And so in crafting it, got the to know, to feel, to do, which is some people describe it as the head, heart and hand.
Yes.
And all the application. Now, you also had an acronym for the application part. Now, I would put you on the spot and see if you can remember it.
I can't.
So I'm just going to, this is out of Eddie's notes when he did the preaching. It's not in the head that I've added there because I hadn't asked Eddie if I could cut and paste that bit out. But he's got, is there an attitude to change? Is there a promise to claim? Is there a priority to set? A lesson to learn? An issue to resolve? A command to obey? An activity to avoid or stop? A truth to believe? An idol to tear down? An offence to forgive? A new direction to take, or a sin to confess? And out of that, I've used that little acronym quite a bit where I haven't remembered, obviously, because I'm still looking on the sheet. But going through, is there something out of there that helps me clarify why we're preaching this? So, Eddie, making your message practical, how do you make this practical? You put a big emphasis on making sure your message applies to current events, current culture. I guess that's one of the big challenges, something you're really good at. How do you go about making sure that this message applies to current culture?
Yeah, it's just become so much more apparent for me today, particularly in our current world environment where everything is just so uncertain. And you may have even come across this US military term, VUCA, V-U-C-A, where they describe the world currently as V is for volatile, U it's uncertain, C it is complex, and A it's ambiguous. And so the only certainty that we have in the world right now is uncertainty. And so how do we preach to that kind of world? How do we communicate with young people who are wanting to find hope in the world? How do we make that practical? So yeah, going back to those application points being in there, really, really important. But also keeping in mind, it's particularly for the upcoming generations, they really want vision. They really want to know what the vision is. What vision do you have for a better future? What have you got to offer? I know that working with young people today in the church I'm in and also across the conference, they really want to be world changers. They're not happy just to change our church or to change our family. They really want to be able to do that. I also keep in mind that the ability to apply and understand the theory and also the principles of adaptive leadership and how that works, and knowing that leadership today requires a leadership approach that is appropriate for many different situations. And then lastly, in terms of what I keep in mind of wanting to be able to communicate to the current and upcoming generations, is that there's a real desire there to be missional. And how can we present a gospel that is concrete, that is meaningful, and that really connects in a where we are the missionaries in our neighborhoods, and not only are we incarnational, but we are able to truly follow the Spirit and where the Spirit is leading. So I know that's still at a theory level, Brendan, but I just needed to underpin some of my next comments by saying that. So just with preaching today, I think I've found in more recent times the need to find ways where there's a bit more interactivity taking place in the messages. So everything that we know of, we've learned, and you may have different ways of doing things where you are, but just to find ways where there's connection and the ability for the audience to talk back to you, to talk with each other, to do. Just last Sabbath, I gave everybody orange cards. And I remember this from sessions. As a president, I'm going to these sessions and everybody's got a card about voting for different things. And so I just asked simple questions and people would put their card up, but it was just a way for them to have a voice in the message and a way to contribute to what was taking place. So yeah, there's a whole lot there, but if I could just emphasize that whole piece of thinking through creative ways to be more interactive.
Cool. Just on a comment down the side, Robert's just asked if I can copy and paste that application part into the side chat there. It's on a PDF, Robert. So I'll
send that through.
Yeah, I can send that through.
The whole lot is fine.
I'll attach. It'll have Eddie's seminar from way back many years ago in New Zealand. It'll be a PDF. It'll have my handwritten notes on it. I'll attach that the minute we do the question time. Next question, Eddie. So how do you evaluate your preaching? I know you take your sermon preaching quite seriously. How do you evaluate how that worked and how God worked in that message on any given Sabbath?
For those of you who are married, God has given you a gift of blunt feedback, and hopefully you get it from her on Sunday and not on Sabbath afternoon. My wife's great, and I'm sure for those of you who are or have your husband giving you feedback, always a good place to start. There's nothing like the recording. A lot of us have our messages recorded, and being willing to watch that and listen to that, and that works for me. And it's amazing how many phones are on these days and recording you, so that's always a reality. I go back. I know this sounds weird, but I do go back to the shower. And when I preached that message that I preached on Sabbath in the shower the next day, it always sounds better, because everything that I wish I'd said, I remember. But then that's when I come out of the shower and I do sit down with my notes and I go through the notes again and just add in or just note down things that I'd like to remember next time to improve what I could have done better that first round.
So that's your reflection process. The PDF I've just put on the sidebar for those of you who have joined since we've started. On the sidebar under chat, there's now 2 documents sitting. There's the original document we had matching today, and I've just put up a PDF of the notes from a very long time ago, from when I went to a seminar with Eddie. You'll find my handwritten notes in there. But that includes the application part. Eddie, you emphasise the need to learn from and observe and listen to good preaching. Where do you go? Where do you find that? How do you listen, observe, and learn from good preaching?
It's such an important question, and we have just a wonderful plethora now of messages available to us. So we all have our favourite preachers, and I think it's important to listen to a variety of preachers and also not just Adventist preachers, but preachers from other denominations, and see how they are preaching as well. But if you can have someone who will listen to you and be willing to give you true and helpful feedback, that is always good. But yeah, I know Brendan is the same, but I just live on always listening to podcasts every single possible moment, whether you're exercising, in the car, wherever you are, just always listening and listening for the way different guys and girls turn a phrase, the way they get their timing, their pacing, intonations, all those things really are very important. And that ability to just see how somebody does it well, and then you have to practice. And I don't know you guys, but I've been preaching for a lot of time. I do a lot of preaching, but I still am a big believer in practice, and I practice. I want to be the first person to hear the message so that I can critique it straight away. And so I'll practice and run through at least twice, and especially illustrations, especially the introduction, and very much the conclusion. I got so busy just a couple of weeks ago and forgot to practice the conclusion. My wife loved the message, but she said, "Is it you or is it me?" But something didn't make sense there, and I realized. And then I explained to her the conclusion and said, "That's a beautiful message," but everybody missed out because I hadn't. So yeah, that whole piece is really important. Just one more piece on preparation. One of my professors said to our class just a couple of years ago, one of the best preparations you can make that you can take for preparing for a message is to have a good night's sleep. And sometimes we don't have enough sleep the night before, but if you get a really good night's sleep and it ensures that you are present with the people, that's much more important. And sometimes it's being present that allows the Holy Spirit to tell you what you need to say and ensure that not you and your message, but the Lordship of Jesus is proclaimed over those who you're communicating with.
Now, so a good night's sleep for a good sermon. One of the things you and I have chatted about, Eddie, is that as you look at other preachers, you'll see some preachers who are excellent but will have every note for their sermon in front of them, others who don't have any notes, some who are very fixed to a spot. There's all sorts of preachers, all sorts of ways. And one of the things that you talked to me about when I was trying to explore preaching is, hey, learn from all these guys, watch all these guys, but develop who you are as a preacher. Any comments on that? Because sometimes we can then get caught trying to be someone else. What's it mean to be who you are as a preacher?
Yeah, I fell into that trap badly of trying to be Dwight Nelson, trying to be T.D. Jakes, trying to, be other people. And even now, I wish I was as good as... we've got a great preacher at our conference. His name is Paul Siope, and the guy is just a preacher among preachers here at our conference. And I wish I could preach like him, but the truth is, I've found that when I'm myself in the way that I preach, the way that I communicate, it's just highly effective. And that goes deeper into us as pastors and just truly being our authentic selves, where the whole fear of being exposed for what we really are like, the fear of being rejected by people, the fear of people saying things that hurt us, all of that kind of stuff. We just have to really be willing to commit ourselves deeply to the Lord. And that's a part I find even now you get caught up because of the event of preaching and the performance that preaching is, that you forget who God has uniquely created, who's created me to be, and to be faithful to that.
Thanks, Eddie. What I'll do now is open it for questions. Now, just a reminder how this can work. Either you can put up your hand literally and ask you a question, or you can click on the bottom of your screen and that can let me know that you're wanting to ask a question, or just type it in the sidebar. Especially for those of you who aren't on video, who I can't see, So at the moment, all of you are muted. So when I become aware that you want to ask a question, I'll unmute you, let you know it's your turn to ask. But I'm just going to start with Chrissy, who's asked a question in the sidebar. So she's literally typed the question in. Eddie, what time do you think it takes for an average sermon? How much time do you have to put aside to make that work? Now, realising sermons are different, some come faster, but how much time do you think it requires for that? Which is a question from Christy.
Yeah, that's a hard question. I've heard many answers given to this question over the years, from 10 hours to 30 hours. And for me, and just understanding it's not the 10 hours or 30 hours in the week before the sermon. It's over many weeks and months that the sermon has been developed. For me personally, it's usually in the 25-hour region that works for me. And my wife always tells me she can tell when I haven't put the time in, and I know. So for others, I know it's 10 hours and less, but I don't think I would. I personally cannot see it being too much less than 10.
Mm-hmm. So if anyone has a question or an observation, as I say, preaching something all of us do on, that I can see your names on this screen, and some of you do it really, really well and have really clear gifts on that. So you might have some things you can add to today as well. But does anyone have a question I'd like to be asking Eddie? Yeah, going for Robert, then we'll head to Julie. Robert, just unmuted you.
Yeah, I was just listening to that sort of 10 to 30 hours thing. I struggle with that because my preparation's roughly 6 to 10 hours, only because I run seminars, I run meetings, visitations, Bible studies, counseling, etc., family time, and all of that, plus preparation time for a lot of these things. Where do you find more than 10 hours to prepare a sermon? I mean, I do sleep on some things and think about thoughts while I'm driving during the day, but when I actually sit down in front of my computer, time-wise, in my books and all of that, it's around the 6 to 10 hours, squeezing in on top of my other 50 to 60 hours in the week.
And to that, add to that, Eddie, is Chrissy's question about you being a president and pastoring a church and all your responsibilities and your 10 hours crafting a sermon. She's wondering when you sleep. You just told us to have a good night's sleep as well. So there's Chrissy's and Robert's question together.
Yeah. So that 25 hours is starting from the C with the collecting and categorizing. So that's taking all of that. So when you ask, say, hey, what about the actual sitting down time at the computer? And you're right, that actually sitting down at the computer time could be 6 to 10 hours. For me, it's usually 12 to 16 hours. But it's all the other time of the practicing, the thinking it through, the driving around, the talking to my wife about it, or to the pastoral team or to the elders about the message. It's all of that I'm talking about as well. With my schedule and all that I'm responsible for, I'm getting better, but I've become quite ruthless at saying no to a whole lot of stuff. So yeah, I've found that there are a whole lot of other people that can do things that I was doing, and there's also a lot of stuff that I was doing that I don't need to do. And I'd encourage, just looking at your schedule again and seeing what needs to be cut out.
I'm going to head to Julie. I'm unmuting you now, Julie. Your question?
Eddie, just exactly the thing I was going to say was delegating. We all have a team of people somewhere that we can pass stuff off to. But my other question was, can someone take a photo of Eddie's screen? Because the way the sun's coming through the window is just really amazing. And if I didn't know better, I might just go, okay, well, God's just putting that sunlight right over the top of you as you're teaching.
I think it looks like the Holy Spirit shining on him. I think Robert made that comment in the
Oh, did he?
It's nice to see sunshine in New Zealand.
Only in New Zealand, huh? So yes, that was my question. If someone can take a photo of that, because I thought that was pretty impressive. And also that key point about delegating and making sure that we don't think that we're the be-all, end-all for everything we have to do. So for me as a volunteer in my role, working for other people and trying to get all these other things done, it does come back to delegating. And sometimes the computer time doesn't even happen for me. Those things just come flooding and I just write it down, because I might not have my technology with me. And that might be what I preach from. And those things can come at any time. I try not to write and drive.
Yeah.
But on occasion I write and drive. Or I'll pull over and quickly write it down so that when I get that quiet time or that sitting time, I can actually go, oh, yes, okay, I need to make up those other notes. I just have one other question, and that was, sorry, it's escaped me. The application stuff you've sent through, is that correct, Brendan?
Yeah, I've attached that to the sidebar. It's part of the notes. It's a PDF that Eddie gave us a handout a long time ago in New Zealand. And the application is there. What I read out is on page 8 of that PDF.
The other question I had was working out the preaching menu. So forgiveness, relationships, church needs, church mission, fruits of the Spirit. What are some other ones, Eddie, that you talk about nine specifically that you do on a regular basis? So I preach in an Aboriginal church. So we cover off all these topics, but I need to make everything so it's at a level of a grade 9 high school reader, and for some people it's about a grade 6. So a big message in very simple terms to ensure that everyone, whether they're highly educated or not so educated in these things, can pick up the message.
So a couple of questions there, Eddie. We'll go for the one on menu first. How do you know, you've talked about a little bit, but a balanced menu of preaching, but then how do you preach so you reach the educated and the person who doesn't have that education? So there's basically 2 questions there.
Just a question for you, please, Brendan. You know those notes of mine?
Yep.
Do you see there whether it has the list of 9 topics? I can email it to you later on. But I thought and just had a full thought whether it may be there somewhere. Just this list of 9 topics that must be preached every single year in the life of the church. And so,
no, it's not.
Otherwise, okay. Well, I'll make a point of sending that list through to you.
Cool.
Thank you.
So yeah. Yeah, that if I give an example at the church where I'm pastoring this year, so we've preached at the beginning of the year 1 series out of Nehemiah, just in the month of January, just on building people. So not so much building the wall, but building people, just a relationship series. And then we spent 2 months, February and March, preaching through our church values. And so our church, the name of our church is Ponsonby. And so we've got our church values as an acrostic with the name of our church. And so we just spent 8 weeks. And so that's an example of one that develops the people, and then another that is about moving the church forward. And right now we're doing fruits of the Spirit. Later on this year, so we've got the whole year mapped out in terms of getting a balanced. So Old Testament, New Testament, doctrines. We're doing a one series in Revelation, a relationship series, a stewardship series. So a whole range like that, just to get a good balanced diet for everybody.
And the second question, which is the challenge of how do you preach in a way to connect with the highly educated and those who haven't had that education, or those who are thinking at a grade 6 and someone from university? How do you preach with those people in your congregation?
Yeah, our congregation now is a diverse congregation with PhDs, as well as people who didn't complete high school. And again, we find that everybody is leveled when it comes to application. So that application about how you live your life out is really important, because everybody's the same when it comes to that. The outline also is very much the application points and the texts. So, but then also with resources at the end, so that for those who want to study more or to take it further, they have the ability to. But always preaching so that the 12-year-old can understand. That's who we're really going for, because of the multi-generational audiences that we have in our typical Adventist churches, is wanting to ensure that the 12-year-old understands.
Other questions? If you have a question, just let me know. I'll unmute you so you can ask. Yeah, I'm about to unmute Casey. Thanks, Casey.
Yeah. Okay, let me just do my mic. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we've got you there.
Okay, great. Yeah, listen, I think one of the challenges with the Adventist pulpit is there's always this plethora of other things competing for the calendar year. I mean, everything from Pathfinder, Messenger, to regionals, to camp meeting. There's just all of those things. On top of that, I have an associate pastor. I want to give him plenty of opportunity. And also you want to develop people who may have a gift for communicating, or even just giving an opportunity for your spiritual leaders, elders, to be able to share occasionally. My question is, what strategies, when you were pastoring, did you implement to keep a balance, to be able to say sufficient amount of time, but then also say yes in terms of you being in the pulpit an appropriate amount, considering all of those pressures you have on that pulpit?
I'm not sure if everyone else had some of the issues with Casey's connection just then. I'll restate it again. So with all the things going on, there's a lot of things competing for space in the life of the church, whether it be Pathfinders wanting a Sabbath and all the other ministries wanting their Sabbath. You've got people who want to develop their preaching gifts. He has an associate, an intern who needs to preach. What's the balance between Casey preaching and sharing what God is leading him towards as a pastor, and trying to balance the rest of the life of the church? Is that correct, Casey? That'd be a okay summary?
Yes.
Yep. Thanks, Eddie.
Yeah.
How do you go with that one?
Yeah, great question. We have a master plan for the church, and we had this at Papatoetoe, Brendan, where we have this master calendar, and most churches would have a master calendar that shows all the conference dates, all the local church events and things like that. And then part of that is also the who's speaking. I believe as pastors, I think as much as possible that we be in the pulpit, because the best place to lead the church is from the pulpit. And so and it sounds like, Casey, you try and do that, but you're wanting to get everybody else the opportunity to as well. And that's a tough one. But I think if you're lead pastor, then it's important for you to be giving direction. And so what we try and do with our elders at the church that we're at now, because we've got 12 elders, and there's a couple of associate pastors as well, that we try and get them to be preaching in other places, or taking other teaching time slots in the life of our church, or in other churches that need help. And our elders may get to preach one or two times in the church, but there are other elders who will not preach at all because it's not their gift. So it's trying to find those who have the gifting.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Sorry, Casey, that one, do you want to follow up on that one?
Yeah. I think the challenge is not even your own conviction of how often you need to be in the pulpit. It's the culture that says, but we're the prayer ministry. we always get one Sabbath a year, and there's and there can be a ton of ministries that have that expectation, and then on top of that, of course, individual elders who are used to having some engagement. So it's I guess, yeah, the challenge is developing strategies, and I'm sure you've done this, strategies to be able to reset those expectations, so that you are in the pulpit sufficiently. And I'd also be interested to know how many times do you think that is as a senior pastor of the church? 20, 25 times, 30 times? How many times in the pulpit would you envision would be appropriate?
Okay, did you get that one, Eddie? Talking about how many times do you be there? Everyone wants their space. In Adventist culture, we try and do everything between 11 and 12 on a Sabbath morning, and if it's not there, it doesn't happen. And Russ is holding up strategy.
Since being in the conference office, I was in the youth department and also in church development. And I always have lived on a formula of half of my Sabbaths are always at the local church, at my local church. And so when Brendan was my pastor, I was always at Papatoetoe for half of the year. And then my itinerating was for the rest of the year. And I'm still on that same formula now. And so every time I'm at Ponsonby, which is half the year, I'm pretty much preaching on those Sabbaths. So, so that's half the year. And I don't know if that helps, or maybe somebody else has a suggestion.
I'm going to unmute Russ and explain his saying no strategy. Russ.
Yeah, I think it's a mutually exclusive thing. You can't have everybody preaching and you be preaching, because you've only got a certain amount of dates in the year. So at some point you have to say no, and here's why. I think the here's why is important, as sort of being clear about that. So if you're going to say, if you as a pastor is going to be in the pulpit a certain amount of dates, I think that needs to be clearly communicated to everybody with the reason for why, and hopefully they would see that, and maybe finding other opportunities for the ministries to share their ministry with the wider church.
Casey, I was going to unmute you because we can't. Sorry, I had you muted there for the sound. I'm muting you now. We can hear you now.
Okay. I would just add to that by saying maybe that you've given me an idea. Maybe what I need to do is say to my elders, look, it seems to me that I need to be in the pulpit about this many times. And I'm thinking the last few years, somewhere between 25 and 30 25 and maybe 27 now that I have an associate. And then maybe I give it to them to weigh in more on who gets those other dates. It seems like there's a lot of other dates, but there's not. When you take camp meeting, regionals, pathfinders, these other things. But there are a few that are open, and then they can take the heat for who we choose for those few that are remaining, rather than always it being me.
Yeah. The other thing to keep in mind, Casey, and talking about Papatoetoe there, is there's always a lot of demand for people to be preaching. But I would always make sure that even if I wasn't preaching, if I was there on that Sabbath, I would have some spot in there, whether it be the welcome, whether it be, a space to announce a program or a process. There'd always be a spot where I would intentionally be doing something that promoted the vision of the church.
Very smart. Yeah, good advice. And we try to do that too.
Heading to Russell, I'm going to unmute you now. This is Russell Bryan, so unmute you now, Russell.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, yeah. I've always had the recognition of what Paul says in Ephesians 3, that part of our role is to stop people from being blown by all the different winds that are around us. And if you have a different preacher each week, you're going to have lots of different ideas, which will be pulling the members in this direction, that direction, and it just isn't good. So one thing that I've practiced in the past, and trying to at the moment, but it isn't working so well, is to get every preacher following a series. So when you're going through a book of the Bible or whatever it is, you say, right, you're going to be preaching on this particular subject, which is following a particular theme or a particular book. To date, I have never had anybody say no. And it has always worked out well. And we can also get together as a pastoral team, elders, preachers, and talk about what the direction is that we want to achieve for our given congregation. So I think that might be helpful.
So even if you're not preaching, you've certainly put time into that preaching. They're preaching the agenda that you and the elders have set for the church. Thanks for the contribution on that one, Russell.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Eddie while we've got him here? Just I've got Russ Wilcox, and I'll go to you, James. Russ?
Just a comment. I think with this discussion around maybe limiting some of the elders being in the pulpit or limiting your associate pastor, might be wise also to have maybe not sharply suddenly make that decision, but to discuss it with them and have them on board with that process, so that you're not seen as kind of the authoritarian pastor wanting to lead the place on his own, but more that it's a discussion that you all agree on, and then bite the bullet together on how do we arrange our time
and how to make sure the church is best pastorally cared for and fed and growing in Scripture. Good observation, Russ. I'm muting you now, James. James in Innisfail. Thanks, mate. Good to see you. I've got you unmuted, but I can't hear your voice, James. Is volume your end? Unmuted. Yep. Have we got you, James? Do I try again? Okay, James is going to type his question. Any other questions while James is doing his typing?
Brendan, just jumping in there with a question. I tend to use probably more personal illustrations, but is there anywhere that, Eddie, do you have any spots where you sort of have a go-to place for great illustrations, apart from just keeping your ears open and collecting clippings along the way? Any hot spots for good stories?
Hey, Russell, it's good to see you, mate.
Yeah, you too.
And, yeah, I found lately, just collecting stories around the conference, or when I'm in the local church, just stories of the church members they love. Yeah, I just love the photo and the story that goes with it. Just that local story just seems to really hit so well. But yeah, I'm always looking for stories. It's a tough one.
Thanks, Eddie.
I'm meeting Robert. Robert, Western Australia.
Yeah, I was just going to add to Russell Bryan's comment about having good preachers and making sure we don't have any kind of winds of doctrines kind of blowing. I've had those issues with two of my churches, which have been the toughest churches in the conference here in WA. I found that it took me a little while, but I ended up taking charge of the preaching roster, and I do some sermon series. I have fine-tuned good speakers from the local conference, the admin, as well as myself. I usually preach every Sabbath, every other Sabbath in both my churches. I use my elders, a few good core preachers, and that sort of, I usually tie it up every 6 months, my preaching roster. That just sort of helps filter out any negativity, and yeah.
Thanks for the observation, Robert. James, did you end up typing a question there, mate?
I think my microphone might be working now.
We can hear you. Ask you. Yeah. Off you go.
Yeah, the technical issues. I like what Russell Bryan mentioned just earlier about getting everyone onto a sermon series. Even on the days that you're not there, they still kind of follow along the same pattern. And especially, I think, for those of us who are preaching, who are pastoring multiple churches, we can find it a bit difficult to get into some momentum and getting through a series. So it always seems like something comes up and you get sidetracked this way and that way. But that's a possible way of doing it. But something else that's come up recently is a lot of folks still come to me and say, "Oh, we like it when you're preaching, Pastor, But when so-and-so preaches, we got issues with that. Or when so-and-so preaches, no, that doesn't quite teach you, but we want you to preach more. And I know that in recent times, folks have been doing a lot of these, where you have these campuses instead. So you've sort of had, you have your video link and you have your video and whatnot. And so folks have been asking me whether it's possible for me just to preach all the time and then sort of like send the video to the other church, that type of thing. Have you had any experience with, I know there's some issues with that for me personally, but have you had any experience with that type of preaching in its effectiveness, in its ability to still bring life change? And I know that the challenge there is you're not really developing anyone else because, as Casey said, you have to give people opportunity to grow. But at the same time, to stay on message, there's a bit of a tension there. And I think that's been sort of verbalized a few different ways. I'd just like to hear your thoughts on whether or not it's a good idea for the preacher to be there preaching all the time, and is that video thing making a culture of dependence upon the preacher? Is it enhancing that, or is it beneficial enough for us to get the message across to take that risk?
So then we could have Dwight Nelson preaching for all of us every Sabbath. Eddie, you're
this is the challenge we got. I'm just trying to work out the best way to do it. Just some thoughts on that. Yeah.
Eddie?
Hey, good question. Good question. And that's one of the advantages of having a series, is that if a sermon does go wonky with one of the elders or somebody, you come back in the series and try to bring things back on track, and you're in that series. One of the things we're trying to do with our current group of elders is the training time. So part of our elders meetings is preaching, training, and then with each elder, as it's coming up their time to preach, it's just to walk through with them, because I do feel for the guys that they're not trained, they don't preach that often, and we all know what it's like. You've got to practice, and I impress upon them to practice, come along to the church and practice. But yeah, it's tough because the people still say, "Hey, we love it when you're here," and and all of that. But we do have to teach and train them, and even the best of preachers, people like a bit of variety.
It's coming up 2:00 for our finishing time. Eddie, even though he's in the New Zealand conference, Eddie, are you happy for guys in Australia to email you, keep in contact with you with preaching help, preaching tips? That's okay for me to offer that to our guys? Hey,
thanks for even coming in and to listen today and for inviting me to be a part of this. Yeah, anytime. Love to help out if I can. But you've got some great preachers there that I know. I know Brendan and Russell, and they're great preachers. So I'm sure you've got many other good guys over there too.
Now, what you do have is Eddie's PDF. So you've got the notes that we have, which includes a summary of Communicating for Change by Andy Stanley. So that's in the Word document at the top of the list of resources. You've got books for further study in there. Then you've got Eddie's handout from quite a few years ago. That's up there. If you have any questions for that, by all means email Eddie. It's eddie.tupai@adventist.co.nz or...
I think, what does it say, Eddie? It should be Edward Tupai.
Edward Tupai. Cool. Eddie, thank you for joining us today. I realise that you've got a busy time with the pastor's family's retreat, so I appreciate you making the space to join us and take that time out. It looks like you got a beautiful day outside with that sun shining in, coming in evening in New Zealand, so we're going to let you go and enjoy that, and hope Tess picked up some really good ideas for enlivening public marriage at her seminar. Eddie, I'm going to say a prayer for you and our team who have joined us today, and then we'll be done. Let's pray. Lord, we come to you now, just pray for Eddie, Tess, and the boys. We pray you guide and bless him as a president, as a pastor, as a husband, as dad, and all the various roles you've called him to. We just thank you for his willingness to spend time with us today. We thank you for the gifts you've placed in his life and his willingness to use them in serving you. And we just pray for the North New Zealand pastors and their spouses as they have their retreat in Rotorua. May you guide and bless them, and may they get a real deep sense of your presence in their meeting. We pray for our pastors across Australia and the faces we see sitting on our screen now from Western Australia, Northern Australia, Tasmania. We just pray for our team that that we do take seriously the call you've placed in our lives to share you with others, and may we lift you up. May people be drawn to you. We ask your guidance and blessing today. Amen.
Amen.
Once again, thank you for joining us. The next webinar is May 18, and we're looking at creating and casting vision. But we'll send out a little promo before that. But yeah, May 18, 1 o'clock Australian Eastern Time, and that's the next time we'll join together. So I'll look forward to catching up with us, come around and visit around your conferences. Thank you for joining us today. Lovely to see your faces on the screen. As I say, any other questions, anything else, feel free to email me, and I can email you these documents again if you need them, or I'm sure Eddie's happy to answer further questions. Enjoy the rest of your day. Look forward to when we catch up with you next time.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Eddie.
God bless you guys.
God
bless you guys.
We'll say goodbye to one another.
Adios.
Goodbye.
God bless you guys.
Thanks, Eddie.
See you, Charlie.
See ya.
Yeah, blessings.
Bye. Bye, Dave.
Thanks, guys. Enjoy the rest of your day.
See you, David.
Bye, Julie.
Catch up.
Oh, hello, Dave.
Bye. See you later, Ian.
See you later, Christy. Thanks for joining us. Thanks, Alfredo. Good to see you, Casey.
Oh.
See you later, Robert. All the best for shifting house, Robert. Nice to see you, Dave. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, mate.
Hey, good to see you, Brendan. I didn't hear much from you, but nice to see you on there.
See you later.
See you later.